happy to be back. Inshallah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما ربي زدني علما. Hope you guys had an awesome week. I know I'm like really sad that we had to miss last week, but alhamdulillah, I was able to make dua for everybody, and Umrah was very packed but very nice, alhamdulillah, but I'm happy to be back. Hopefully, you guys are doing well, inshallah. We're gonna go ahead and just jump right into it because we have a lot to cover. So I want to make sure that we can get through everything, inshallah. Let me present. All right, so alhamdulillah, the last class we were able to go through the beginnings of Salah. We talked about Salah, we talked about the different the procedures of Salah. We were able to talk about the things that are considered to be fard, or what we would say obligatory, and things that are considered to be wajib, that are necessary to do. And this distinction is going to be important in our class today, because our class today will be teaching us about the different times if we were to make a mistake, or if we were to make a mistake, how should we make up for that mistake? If something was to, if you would say like go wrong, for example, where are you to fix that in terms of being able to figure out the position that you should properly be doing at that time. So, pull up my notes here. Hopefully it works. Check the files. Perfect. And we're in. So what we're going to cover today, inshallah, is we're going to cover mistakes. Today we're going to wrap up Salah. Okay, we're going to completely wrap up the conversation of Salah. Next class we'll talk about Ramadan, and then we'll have one more class after that, and we'll be done. And that last class we'll be talking about Hajj and Zakat all in one class, inshallah. So today, inshallah, we're going to be talking about the last portions on our conversations of Salah. So we'll talk about different mistakes, like if someone makes a mistake in their Salah, how should they make it up? We'll also talk about different exceptions to the rule. So when is it that a person doesn't have to perform the full Salah in the way that, has been prescribed or ordained? Or when is it that certain things can be, like, you could say, switched out or changed, or whatever the case may be? The third thing we'll talk about is congregational prayers, okay? So how to, I guess you could say, of congregational prayer. And then we'll talk about special congregational prayers. We'll talk about special prayers. We'll understand what all of this means in terms of its difference, okay? But something before we go through mistakes that I want to make sure that we have in our mind is that we made a distinction between what's known as fara'id and wajib, okay? Fara'id are obligatory acts. They're things that are absolutely necessary within the Salah for it to have been done. And if it's missed, then there is a major consequence to that Salah. And then there are things that are wajib, right? Something that is wajib is something that is necessary, but is not absolutely necessary. So there is a consequence or a way of fixing it. But if it's missed, then the consequence is not as high, as you would say. So with that being said, the question now comes, what should I do if I make a mistake in my prayer? Now, if it's the case that someone completely misses a prayer, if someone completely misses a fard prayer, okay? If someone, for example, they miss Fajr, what do they have to do? They will have to make up that prayer, okay? This is called qada. They will have to do qada of that prayer. They will have to make it up. If someone misses Dhuhr or Asr or Maghrib or Isha, that similarly, equally, they have to make up those prayers, all right? Now, if someone missed a fard within the prayer, then what would they do? Fard is like the takbir tahrima, so the initial takbir that opens the prayer. It is, for example, standing. It is standing and you have the ability to stand. It is reciting, for example, the recitation of surahs out loud, so in Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha. It is doing ruku or doing a sujood or the final sitting, the tashahhud, or even exiting the prayer. Okay, so these are the different fara'id of the prayer. If someone were to miss one of those major components of the prayer, they will have to redo the entire prayer. Okay, if someone misses one of those major components of the prayer, they will have to redo the entire prayer. If someone missed what's known as a wajib within the prayer, and the wajib is pretty much all the other things, the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha, or the additional recitation of a surah, it is standing after ruku, it is the sitting between the jalsa, sitting between the two sajdas, the first sitting, the recitation of the tashahhud, the exiting, the saying the taslim to exit the prayer, doing things in order, or even like maybe not taking too much time in between things, and being able to really take your time with the prayer. Okay, if someone was to miss something like that, which is a wajib, then they would have to perform at the end what's called a sajdatu sahu, which is a prostration of forgetfulness. So one would go into at the end of the prayer, the way that is done is that at the end of the prayer, they would then make one taslim, or in another opinion, it says that you can make two taslims. Okay, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before you speak or do anything, then one would then go into sujood. Okay, and in their sujood, they will say their du'as, right? So they will say the regular du'as. Then they'll come back up, they'll say a du'a, then go back into sujood, and then come back up, say your tashahhud, do your salawat, and then do taslim. All right. So there's an extra sajda that would be added, an extra two sajdas that are added at the end of the prayer as a means of fixing what you have missed in the prayer before. Right? Any questions about this? Thumbs up.
I have a question. If someone misses a rak'ah, like they're off by one rak'ah in any salah, would that be missing a fard or missing a wajib?
It would be missing a fard. But what the slight difference there is that if it's an entire rak'ah, if it's an entire rak'ah that they missed, before they do taslim, they can just get up and make it up.
Okay.
Before having exited the prayer. So they will make up that one rak'ah and then they will do sajdatu sahu. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if they exit the prayer, then they have to remake the prayer.
Okay.
Any other questions? No. Okay, let's keep going. I had once learned about a long time ago when I was learning how to pray. It was like, this was many years ago. I remember someone came to teach at our Masjid how to pray, and he was going through like how to make up a mistake. And it was the most confusing thing I had ever learned, because he was talking about how, like, if you miss in a certain area, you have to calculate it like it's that second rak'ah instead of like the last one. It was so confusing that for years I was just like, I don't really know how to make up like something if I missed it. And when I started studying, and I was like, wait, isn't this supposed to be a little bit more like super complicated? Because that's what I had learned. And I realized that, like, we had never learned the differentiation between a fard and a wajib, like something that's considered to be absolutely necessary in a prayer and something that was just like, it's still necessary, but there's a different way to make it up. And so because we never learned that distinction, what he was explaining to me became very confusing. I don't know why, it just felt like, sharing that with you guys, but hopefully this is not confusing at all. But yeah, so if you miss a rak'ah, before you exit the prayer, you'll just get up and make up that rak'ah and then do your sajda to sahur. Okay. Now, other things that require someone to redo a prayer, because we said that if someone misses a complete fard, and this is like exiting the prayer, so they miss a complete fard, they have to make up the prayer, they have to redo it. Another thing is like eating. Okay, if you say, for instance, you're like, someone may say, well, how could you be eating in a prayer? Say, for instance, you start praying and like you're chewing gum the whole time. You will have to go back and make up that prayer. Drinking, okay, talking in the prayer. Now, people will say, well, I have children, and like, what if I'm trying to signal my children or whatever the case may be? You cannot talk within the prayer. So even if you're trying to signal them, then you can signal them, but you still shouldn't do any excess movements, okay? Excessive movements, that too can be a means of breaking the prayer, all right? So you can signal them in a way that hopefully that is not too excessive, and but you should not talk in your prayer because that will break the prayer and require you to make it up. And then breaking wudu. If someone, for example, passes gas during salah, that is something that will completely break the prayer, and it will require them to redo the prayer. Now, we talked previously about people who are excused, where there may be a situation where someone cannot hold their wudu, whether it be excessive bleeding, whether it be like an excessive passing of gas, because that's like what they struggle with. If that's the case, those are already excused, so they won't break the prayer. But this is talking about things that are not excused. So it's talking about a case where someone can control their bladder, they can control, like different things, and then it happens in the prayer, then that would be something that would break the prayer. Right? Any questions here? Nope. All right, let's keep going, inshallah. Now, when it comes to exceptions, these exceptions are more so where it's called a rukhsa, so where certain types of recommendations are being given or certain types of leniencies are being provided. And this is when it comes to travel and being sick, okay? When it comes to travel, it's important that we have to define what travel is, all right? The definition of traveling is where someone makes an intention to leave their home for the means of travel, right? So, like, you're not just going to the grocery store, for example, you're actually saying that you're trying to leave your home to travel. The second thing is that it has to be outside of the metroplex. So, like, wherever you live, it has to be outside of that area. You cannot be traveling to your next door neighbor's house, for example. Or like if maybe you're going like 20 minutes away, that's not considered to be traveling. The way that the scholars defined this traveling, based off of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, was that they defined it by 48 to 50 miles. Okay. But for us nowadays, we don't necessarily even consider 48 to 50 miles to be travel. That's why the intention part is important, right? So, for example, I live in Dallas, Texas, and it is very common for someone to drive 50 miles for food. And it's not considered to be travel. It's considered to be honest, like it's considered to be, okay, a little bit further than down the street. Because you have to travel far everywhere for things here in Texas, in Dallas. So, but in Atlanta, if you tell somebody to come 50 miles or an hour away from wherever you are, yeah, they'll consider that a day trip. They'll consider that to be traveling. So it all depends on what it's the intention and what is considered to be traveling based off of how you're defining it. And then also, how long are you allowed to be considered a traveler? To be able to properly place these rulings that are there, it has to be less than 15 days. So basically 2 weeks, okay, 14 days. It has to be less than 15 days. Anything more than 15 days, someone is then considered to be what's called a muqim, which is a resident, all right? They're no longer, Islamically for this ruling, they're no longer considered to be a traveler. They're now considered to be a resident. This is not in transit though, okay? So it's saying, for example, if I was to travel from Dallas to Qatar and I stayed in Qatar for 14 days, then I would still be considered to be a traveler. And then I went to Mecca for 14 days, I would still be considered to be a traveler. However, and that even though that equals to like technically like a month of travel, I can shorten or whatever the case my prayers because I'm in two different places for that amount of time. If I was to go to Qatar for a total amount of what you would say 25 days, and that's just where I was staying, that I wouldn't consider to be a traveler, okay, unless I'm in transit. Apart from that, I would not be considered to be a traveler because it's more than 15 days. So I hope that makes sense. So if you're staying within a place for 15 days and more, then you're not considered to be a traveler, right? So what do you do? The first thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has now given us the ease of shortening prayers. So anything that was normally 4 rak'ah, they now become 2, right? So instead of praying 4 rak'ahs for Dhuhr and Asr and Isha, you will only pray 2 rak'ahs because that is the concession that is being given to a traveler. The second thing is combining. Though there is a difference of opinion, in the case of the Ahnaf, the Hanafis, it is permissible to combine prayers while you're in transit. Once you're no longer in transit, then you can just shorten, but combining is not something that is recommended. The way that you combine prayers is that Fajr stands alone. You can combine Dhuhr and Asr, and then you can combine Maghrib and Isha, right? So Fajr stands alone, pray that by itself, combine Dhuhr and Asr, and then you can combine Maghrib and Isha. The way that one combines is that you will pray 2 rakats of Dhuhr and you will exit the prayer. Then you will get up again and pray 2 rakats of Asr and then exit the prayer. For Maghrib, you will pray 3 rakats of Maghrib, exit the prayer, and then stand up and pray another 2 rakats of Isha, and then you will exit the prayer. When it comes to your Sunnah, it is possible, it is okay in this time, even though it's still recommended, obviously, to do your Sunnah, but it's perfectly fine in this time to drop a level. So, say for instance, someone was praying all of the Sunnah of Dhuhr, then they're allowed to pray less Sunnah there. Um, it's okay for you to do what is as easy as and convenient for you during your time of travel. And this is such a beautiful concession because traveling is not easy. It wasn't easy back in that time. And even though we have more luxuries when we're traveling now, it's still not an easy task. It's still taxing on the body, it's still tiring, it's still time consuming. And so all of these different concessions are being brought here as a means of ease and a blessing from Allah. And this is what the Prophet tells his companions. When they say that, they're thinking about like how they feel like they get less reward, the Prophet says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ease for you. And this is why he has provided you with this level of easement, especially while traveling. Right? Now, when someone is sick, we already talked about getting around wudu when someone's not feeling well. But when it comes to prayer, the default way is to stand. Now, if someone's sickness doesn't allow for them to stand, then the next step is to sit. If someone's sickness does not allow for them to sit and pray, the next step for them is to lay. Each of these stages require for someone to be facing the Qibla. It's very possible, though, that for instance, someone may be in a hospital bed and they cannot move, so they cannot turn their bed to face the Qibla. If that's the case, then one will try their best to face the Qibla. And if they can't, then it's completely okay. When you're sitting and praying, there's a question of does one start off the prayer by standing as much as they can and then finish off the prayer by sitting? The answer, which is why it's called can it be a hybrid? The answer there is that the recommendation is that once one has decided on one method of prayer and within the realm of their illness, then they should maintain that. So for instance, if someone decides that they cannot stand and pray because it will be difficult, for instance, maybe they can't go into sujood or they can't go into ruku or whatever the case may be, then it is their responsibility to just sit and pray for the entire prayer. even if they can stand in the initial standing, they should just sit for the whole prayer. All right, this is the recommendation. When one is laying, they should either lay on their backside or on the side, on their backside like this, or they should turn to the side and they should lay there and they should pray in that way. If someone cannot make movements with their hands while they're laying and praying, then they can use their eyes to then make those movements. Again, this is in the easement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for us to be able to still fulfill our responsibility to Him. Inshallah. Any questions? I know I'm kind of talking a little fast. Don't mean to. No? We're good? All right, let's keep going. Now, there's a very important part of your salah that we didn't go over, and it's not necessarily a part of the salah itself. It's a part of where you're praying, and this is called the sutra. So the sutra is basically when you're standing up to pray. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, so the sutra is basically placing something in front of you to indicate that you're praying, and so that also people can have something to go around so that they don't cross in front of you while you're praying. And the reason why this is something that's really important is because there has been a very clear dislike for someone crossing in front of somebody while they're praying. In the authentic narration from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if only people knew about how egregious it is or how sinful it is to cross in front of someone while they're praying, they would wait 40 years, okay? They will wait for the amount of 40 years of someone praying just to cross in front of them. So what that means is that the Prophet is saying that when someone is making salah, you should not walk in front of them, rather walk behind whatever sutra they've placed. Now, there's conversation, how big should the sutra be? Does it have to be a certain height? Whatever, it just should be big enough for someone to be able to see that you're praying and they can be able to walk behind that, right? So they're not walking in front of you, they're walking in front of the sutra, basically. When it comes to congregational prayer, the imam serves as your sutra. So the reason why that's a question is because somebody may be joining a congregational prayer later. And when they join a congregational prayer, they may end up having to walk in front of people in the congregation. So would that make them sinful? The answer is no, the imam serves as the sutra. So therefore, if you have to cross in front of someone who's praying already, there is nothing wrong with that, right? Any questions? All right, let's keep going, inshallah. Now, when it comes to congregational prayers, there are different rewards for different people, all right? For men, the greatest reward, this is the order of the greatest reward. This is a little bit messed up, sorry. Hold on, let me see. 1 second. Okay, this is a little bit wrong, but it's okay, I'll fix it before we get there. So the way that congregational prayer works is that the reward that people get is based off of the person. So for men, the first thing is praying in congregation, okay? Praying in congregation is much better than, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, small little mistake. Let me fix this really quickly. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. Can't believe I made that mistake. Okay, so when it comes to congregational prayer, for men, this is the order in which there's the greatest reward. So Jama'ah in the Masjid, praying in congregation in the Masjid. Then there's praying in congregation outside of the Masjid, and then praying by oneself. And this is all based off of authentic narrations from the Prophet ﷺ, encouraging men to pray in the Masjid, to pray in congregation, and if you have to, then you pray by yourself. But the most reward lies in men praying in congregation in the masjid. As for women, all three of praying in either one of these scenarios gets equal reward. And the reason that is not necessarily the reason, but what this is giving is that men have the responsibility of going to the masjid and praying in congregation. But if they can't, they can pray by themselves. As for women, you get reward for praying in the masjid. You get reward for praying in congregation. You get reward for praying by yourself. You get the best reward in whichever scenario you decide to pray in. And that's honestly an honor and a beauty because there are certain responsibilities and things that people have, and those differences in responsibilities and things allows the flexibility to get the utmost reward in whatever situation you may be. So when it comes to congregational prayers, it's very important to know the how-to. All right, the first thing is the lineup. If there are men and women in the same place about to pray, then the imam will stand all the way in the front, the men will line up behind the imam, and then the woman will line up behind the men. Now, if it's a woman-only congregation, then the women will all be on one line, but the one who will be leading the salah will be in the middle, okay? So she should have equal people on her right side and equal people on her left side. If there are just two people leading the congregation, they will stand side by side. From men, the second person who's not the imam will stand a little bit behind the imam, okay? Will stand a little bit behind the imam. If there's three or more people, then the imam will stand in front and the two people will stand behind, or the rest of the people will stand behind. When it comes to congregational prayers, you will call the adhan and the iqamah. There's a little bit of an asterisk here because if it's a woman-only congregational prayer, then there is no adhan and iqamah called. Okay, you don't call it out loud, or you'll just go and start the prayer. Some etiquette to keep in mind is that you should be following the imam, okay? You should not go ahead. So if the imam says Allahu Akbar, you should wait a little bit and then you will go into sujood, or you will go into ruku or whatever. You should not go into ruku or sujood before the imam. So even if he says Allahu Akbar and it takes him a little bit of time to get into sujood, he should be in sujood before you, right? So you can take some time before you then proceed into going to sujood. Now, someone may ask the question, well, how do I, what if I'm running late and I just joined the prayer? How do I know, or what should I do? The answer to that is, the first thing is, if you've caught the ruku, then you've caught the rak'ah. This is a model that I put in my head because I always forget, is it before or after ruku? If you caught the ruku, then you've caught the rak'ah. If you did not catch the ruku, then you will, after the prayer is done, you will get up and you will make up that rakat or those rakats that you missed. Okay, so just to repeat that, you're late. Maybe the imam is on the second rakat. He goes into ruku. You catch the ruku. All right, that means that you have one rakat to make up. So at the end of the prayer, once the imam exits the prayer, you will just get up and you will make up that last rakah that you missed. When it comes to praying in congregation, or for prayers in which the Quran is recited out loud, you will listen. You do not have to recite alongside the imam. But for the prayers that are recited in silent, then you will recite your own Fatiha and your own portion of the surah. Okay, so the principle is, if it's out loud, you listen, and if it's a quiet portion, then you would recite. Right? Any questions about congregational prayer or in general? All right, let's keep going. When it comes to the special type of congregational prayers, there are two. There's Juma and there's Juma and there is well, there's three really. There's Juma, there's Eid, and there's funeral prayers. But we'll talk about Eid later. So there's Juma and there's funeral. When it comes to Juma, Juma is Dhuhr time on Fridays. Okay, it is Dhuhr time on Fridays. It is mandatory on every healthy resident adult Muslim male. There are five requirements. They have to be healthy, they have to be a resident, adult, a Muslim, and a male. All right, that is the mandatory. Now, if someone is a woman, for example, it is not mandatory for you to go to Juma, but you should go because it's good for your faith, it's good for you. But what is mandatory for is for every healthy resident adult Muslim male. Resident is important. If someone's traveling, if a Muslim healthy adult male is traveling, it is not obligatory upon that person to go to Juma. Okay, so it's important to keep that in mind. How does it work? The Jummah starts with the Jummah khutbah. The khutbah is considered to be like the salah, so you should not talk and eat and stuff like that during it. So it will start with the Jummah khutbah. After which, then there are two rakats that are prayed in congregation and out loud. Even though Dhuhr is actually normally a silent prayer, but this is the difference. So the congregation, it's done in congregation and it is done out loud, right? When it comes to funeral prayers, a funeral prayer, it is the right of every Muslim to have a janazah, which makes it a fard kifaya, meaning it is something that is obligatory on the community to perform for a Muslim, okay? It does not matter how that Muslim died, all right? If that, it doesn't, regardless of the sin or how that Muslim died, the responsibility of a funeral prayer, it is on the community and it is the right of every Muslim to have their funeral prayer done. So the steps are: one, you make an intention before you approach the prayer. The next thing is that there are four takbirs, right? There's no sajda, there's no ruku, there's nothing. It's just four takbirs in this prayer. The first thing is that the first takbir, you recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and then the Imam will say Allahu Akbar, and in the second takbir, you will do salawat ala nabi. Okay, so you will do Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid, so on and so forth. In the third takbir, you will then do dua for the deceased and the living, and then the last takbir will be the indication towards the salam. The dua for the deceased that we make is Allahumma gfir li hayyina. Oh Allah, forgive our living, wa mayyitina, and our the people who have passed away, wa shahidina, and those who are present, wa ghaibina, and those who are absent, wa saghirina, and those who are young, wa kabirina, and those who are old, wa dhakkirna wa unthana, and our males and our females. Allahumma man ahyaytahu minna fa'ahyihi ala islam, and oh Allah, those amongst us you have kept alive, then give us a life upon Islam. Wa man tawaffaytahu minna, and those of us that you have taken their life or caused them to death, minna, from amongst us, fatawaffahu ala iman, that allow them to have passed away upon the faith of Islam, upon the faith, or having iman. Then I don't know how the rest of this dua got cut out, but there's a last portion of the dua that says, "Oh Allah, do not deprive us of this reward, and do not let us go astray after." Okay. Then there is, and I'll post that whole dua the next time. So this is the special congregation when it comes to your funeral prayers and it comes to your Juma prayer. Any questions about this? We have one more slide section. Any questions?
I have a question
Sure.
about joining a Jama'ah. later. Let's say like you're joining 4 rak'ah, and you have to make up one at the end. What should you recite in that last one? Like if you miss the first rak'ah, and then you make it up at the end, do you recite just Fatiha, or do you recite in addition to that?
If you're only making up the last rakah,
Yeah.
then you will just recite Fatiha,
Okay.
because it's because the last 2 rakahs don't necessarily require you having an additional recitation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would just have to recite Fatiha. But it's recommended in all of the rakats to have an additional surah, but that's a recommendation.
Okay.
So your bare minimum is Fatiha. That makes sense. All right. So when it comes to different special things in Salah, there's one thing that I wanted to make sure we touch on. This is Sajda to Tilawa. Sajda to Tilawa is when you're praying and then Sajda to Tilawa, we talked about outside of prayer already, and that requires wudu. So it's when you're reading Quran and a sajda come up and you just have to do the sajda. Sajda to Tilawa also can occur within prayer. So you may be making salah and then you have an ayah like here, Fasjudu lillahi wa'budu. Okay, so prostrate to Allah and worship. All right. And what you do is that you will go straight into sajda. So you would, after that, wherever the verse stops to be able to do the sajda, you will go straight into sajda and then you will get back up and continue the salah. So you will either continue recitation, which most people do, and then you will continue the salah as normal. All right. The next thing is that a type of prayer, a different type of prayer, special prayer, which is Qiyamul Layl and Tahajjud. Okay, so these sometimes are being used synonymously, but they're not necessarily synonymous. Okay, the difference is very slight. Qiyamul Layl is any prayer that you do in the night after witr, and then Tahajjud is your prayer that you would do after you have taken a nap or after you have slept. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal muzammil, to the Prophet sallam, O one who wraps himself in clothing, Qum al-layla illa qalila, pray, get up, pray in the night except for a little, nisfahu aw inqus minhu qalila, that you can pray half of it or subtract from it a little bit, أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا, or add to it and recite the Quran with a proper or measured or a good amount of recitation. Inna sanulki alayka qawlan thaqila. Indeed, we will cast upon you a heavy word. And this was the first way of salah. Okay, the first thing that was commanded of the Prophet ﷺ was to pray in the night, and this was considered to be qiyamul layl. So the slight difference between qiyamul layl and tahajjud is one is just praying in the night, and the other one is when you have gone to sleep and then you wake up and you pray. So here in Surah Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ, and from a part of the night, فَتَحَجَّدْ بِهِ نَافِلَةً لَكَ, then you should pray an additional prayer of worship for you. فَتَحَجَّدَ, you should wake up in the night and pray an additional prayer for you. أَسَىٰ أَن يَبْعَثَكَ رَبُّكَ مَقَامًا مَحْمُودًا, that perhaps your Lord will resurrect you and give you a praise station, a praiseworthy station. All right. The next thing is Jummah. We already talked about this a little bit, and we talked about funeral prayers as well. Other prayers that are important are Ishraq and Ishraq, Daha, and Chest. Now, these are all synonymous. Okay, they're all the same. They're the prayers that are happening after the prayers that happen after sunrise. Okay, Now, some people say this is the prayers at sunrise, but sunrise is a prohibited time of praying. So right after sunrise is where you will pray these prayers. The reward is a little bit different only because it depends on when you pray it in the sense. So for example, Ishraq is when one has sat down after from the time of um, Fajr until the after sunrise, and then they pray. So you're in the same place and you're sitting down, you're doing dua, and you pray from the time, then you make this prayer. Salatul Duha, you don't necessarily have to have been in the same place making dua that entire time. You just, it's a prayer that's done after sunrise, but before Salatul Dhuhr. Then there is the prayer for rain. Okay, there's a prayer from the eclipse, and there's istikhara. Istikhara is a two nafil prayers with a dua that you recite after when you're seeking to be able to make some type of major decision. All right. And this is also considered to be a special prayer. Ramadan is coming up, and in Ramadan, people typically go on what's called itikaf. Itikaf is when you sit in the masjid for the last 10 days of Ramadan. Some people do it for the entirety of Ramadan, but it was the practice of the Prophet ﷺ and his wives that in the last 10 days of Ramadan, they would stay in the masjid for that time. They will be there to worship. They will be there to set intention. They will be there to worship. They'll fast. They did, talk and have a good time with each other. Some people did do business dealings at that time. But the thing is, they couldn't leave the masjid, all right, unless they needed to. And that need will be something like cleanliness or whatever the case may be. You're not allowed to engage in any type of intimacy in that time. And you also, it's not a vow of silence. Okay. So we don't really have that concept in our deen. It's not a vow of silence. So because it's not a vow of silence, then you're actually encouraged to engage with one another in that time. But the main thing that you're supposed to be doing in that time is worship. All right. When it comes to Ramadan as well, there's one prayer that's very important. This is called Taraweeh. And in Taraweeh, basically, it is the prayer that happens after Isha in Ramadan. There's a difference of opinion as to whether or not it should be 8 prayers or 20. It just all depends on which narration that someone takes. There is no harm in just doing 8, and there's no harm in doing 20. It just all depends on the person. When it comes to Taraweeh, a big question that comes up is, can one hold the Quran while in Taraweeh? There's a difference of opinion there as well. In accordance to the other 3 madhahib, it's completely fine. So in accordance to the Malikiya, the Hanabila, and the Malikiya, the Hanabila, and the Shafi'i, they say that it's fine. As opposed to the Ahnaf, they say that you should not hold the Quran during prayer because it is excessive movement, right? When it comes to witr is 3 rakas, right? There are 2 rakas and then 1. And in the last rakah of witr, then one will recite the dua of kunut. So it is reciting pretty much any dua, but there are some duas in dua books that are a little bit long. Depending upon what madhab one follows, in the last rakah, you will start the prayer, okay, and you will go into your initial takbir. You say your surah, say Fatiha, say surah, and then you will say Allahu Akbar again according to Ahnaf, and then you will do your dua and go into ruku. In accordance to the other madhahib, you will do the dua after ruku. So you will say in your surah, Fatiha, say your surah. Typically, Kul Huwallahu Ahad is the last surah that they will recite in the 3rd rakah. You'll go into ruku, come back up, and do the dua of witr, right? How to decide which one to do or whatever the case may be, following your local masjid and your imam and what he does, especially in Ramadan, that would be the best bet, all right? Last but not least is Eid prayer. Eid prayer is very interesting because Eid prayer has a lot of takbirat. Depending upon the different, what you will call madahib, then it would depend which, you will then figure out which amount of takbirat will be done. So sometimes it is 13 and sometimes it is 11. I feel like Eid prayer is like one of those very big awkward times because sometimes you're ready and you're like at number 11 and then you're like Allahu Akbar and you're going to into ruku when it's really not that time. So depending upon who is leading the prayer, then it will be either 11 or 13 takbirat, right? So this is where they say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. There's no du'as that you say in between, you just do those. Eid prayer is like the reverse of what you would say Jummah. So it starts with the prayer itself and then the khutbah happens, as opposed to Jummah, the khutbah is first and then the prayer. So Eid prayer is the prayer itself and then the khutbah prayer, the khutbah after, sorry. And that is all for special salahs. And that's actually the conclusion of our salah section. Any questions? I know that was kind of quick, but a lot of it we have went through. No? No questions? All right. I actually thought this was going to take 2 hours and it didn't. And that's a testament to you guys and your understanding, alhamdulillah. So we're going to go ahead and stop here, but we will be finishing on time, inshallah. So next class, we're going to go through fiqh of Ramadan, which is right before Ramadan, alhamdulillah. And then the last class that we'll have will be Hajj and Zakat, inshallah. So we only have 2 more classes left, and then we'll be done with this particular section. If you guys have any questions in the meantime, please let me know. I also realized that I had not been sending out the slides, so I will be making sure to send out all the rest of the slides tonight to Sister Lubna, and she'll send it out to everybody, inshallah. And like always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, inshallah. All right? Jazakumullah khairan, everybody. Assalamu alaikum.